Okay, welcome everyone to Do More Better. We are coming back with probably a hot topic for the two of us. We talk about this all the time. Something that made the list of the first few things we wanted to go over. So the episode is about depathologizing anxiety and what the role of anxiety is, and basically some of our take on what you see as either anxiety disorders or typical anxiety for people's lives. But the idea of it out there seems to be often pretty misconstrued.
Right. I would say from our perspective it is.
Yeah. At least our
perspective. From us. Yeah. I think I think we came to this one because this one has gotten very medicalized, I think.
Yeah.
That like anxiety I think the worst thing we did with anxiety was name it, probably. We gave it a name. We gave it a set of symptoms, and it started to sound like strep throat or something like that. Like, oh, I got it. I got anxiety. Now what do I do with this? You know, I have to cure it. And I just don't think we see it that way.
Yeah. And let's give some basic background
Sure.
on anxiety. So there's a bunch of different types of anxiety. You can have phobias, specific fears of certain situations or stimulus. You can have OCD, obsessive compulsive thoughts, compulsion behavior. It can come out as thoughts or behavior. There's general anxiety disorder, most things that come up that kind of, mess with you. There's social anxiety disorder where it's almost always got a social aspect. What else am I missing here?
I just, as you said that, what hit me is the disorder part.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that
Almost all of them get identified disorder.
as the disorder part. But yeah, I think that, I mean, like the OCD one, I would say it's an anxiety disorder, but that may not be agreed upon.
You would say it's
I think it's an anxiety disorder. Yeah. Oh, I mean, okay. So I should probably clarify that. The disorder part it's the D. That
Yeah.
gets the so the OCD, the generalized anxiety disorder, the social anxiety disorder. I think the thing that we often talk about is that anxiety is a very normal part of the human experience. I think the disorder to me would be the no anxiety.
right. It would be far rarer or much more, I don't know, pathological or something. If somebody
Yeah.
walked into our office and said, yeah, I don't have any anxiety at all. Like, I don't experience that.
Yeah, and if they did that, I think my assumption would be like, oh, you're just not aware of your anxiety. You have it, or you've just gotten so good at living with it that you're not aware of it.
Or we're dealing with something far worse, like delusions or a personality problem or something like that.
Right.
But I think the hard part, though, is for people who are really struggling with anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
feel that if you say it's a typical part of the human experience, that you are somehow kind of disenfranchising the whole process. You're
Right.
trivializing what their experiences
Right.
are. So I don't think that's necessarily what we mean, but
Nope.
I would say when you are out there in the world and experiencing anxiety, one of the things we have to often tell teens, but I mean, adults probably need to know this too, is everyone is experiencing anxiety. And anxiety, technically, according to the Diagnostic Manual we use, it's really only a disorder after it disrupts
Yes.
something,
It
becomes
impairs
disruptive to your life.
Yeah, it impairs some area of your life.
Right.
So it's impairing your work, it's impairing your physical health, it's impairing your relationships with people, and it has to cause impairment to actually be a disorder. I'm glad you brought that up too, because I don't want to invalidate. I think some people experience anxiety much higher than I do. Yeah.
I think personally, I look at OCD. We're going to have shows on all these topics, by the way, but I look at OCD and think there's a brain component there that I probably do not have to field sometimes.
You know, yeah.
I think there's interesting statistics. I think I read something that said, 60% of Americans don't like the television on an odd volume number.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, some of that's a little built in.
Clinically, I've seen that a lot too,
Right.
where not just the television, but when you're listening to the radio, it's got to be on an even number or on a number of fives. Yeah, I see that a lot too.
Some of this looks real normal until it doesn't.
Yeah. That makes sense. And so I want to kind of get into like why some people experience it more than others.
Yeah.
And so I think generally for me, well, we'll get into learning. Let's finish with that one. I'd say let's start biological.
Okay.
So biologically, you're born with the genes that your parents gave you.
Yeah.
And if you got two anxious parents, you're going to have an anxious kid. Does that mean that it's genetic? That is debatable, I would say. So you've got biological characteristics that could go into it. Early history trauma So if you got an early history of trauma, what it does seem to do is your central nervous system is programmed to look for threats pretty quickly.
And you build some grooves in that brain real quick to respond to that, generalized stimulus all the time.
Right. And so, like, I think if you've got biological predisposition, early history of trauma, you're probably pretty likely to have a high experience of anxiety, and then learning. I think that is a big part of it too.
Yeah.
I think you should talk about that.
Skills for learning and that kind of thing.
I think, how does negative reinforcement play a role?
Yeah. So negative reinforcement, people throw those terms around all the time. Probably don't want to get too deep into them for this particular episode, but positive reinforcement would mean you're adding something that somebody finds that makes them want to do a behavior again. Negative reinforcement would be taking away something that makes it more likely to occur again. So if you were, trying to get out of a bad circumstance, and I would say we're going to start going more into maybe not necessarily like a nature versus nurture discussion. We're probably going to take this to like evolutionary psychology and those kinds of things. I mean, human beings are 100% wired to avoid negative circumstances. If you see people driving and they pull up to a stop sign, they don't look around for all the beautiful things in life. Like, oh, God, the sky's so blue. No, they're looking for, okay, not going to kill me, not going to kill me, not going to kill me, go. And that's kind of what our brains are meant to do. The guy in the jungle kind of thing from 10,000 years ago, like walk everybody through that.
Yeah. So what is often as I talk, what is the purpose of your brain, of your mind? What does it do? And its primary function is to keep you alive. And so, yeah, I mean, it does all the things.
It'll use anything it gets its hands on.
But like its basic level is like it keeps your heartbeat, it keeps you breathing. You don't even have to think about that stuff. And the other thing it's doing is looking for threat. And I think we go back. We think about the caveman who's walking along and sees a blob off in the distance and goes, "Oh, look, there's a bush with some berries on it. Cool, that's fine, right?" If they're wrong and that was a bear, then they're not a caveman anymore. They're no longer living. Now, the caveman who makes the opposite mistake, the one who sees the blob off in the distance and says, "Oh, I think that's a bear," and they go back.
Should probably go back to my cave.
And they go back to the cave, and it actually was a berry bush. You know what? They're hungry.
They're still alive.
And so we've got 12,000 years of that.
And your brain is super developed with multiple systems for that exact process. I mean, there's like a particular snake one, and your brain can react to those threats before it even really has consciously thought through, oh, that's a threat.
Right.
You can see something that looks like a snake on the ground and jump before you've ever really processed, like, that's not what that was.
So we survived that way. And so we
all got left with that guy.
Yeah, right. And so evolution does not prepare you for your current environment. It prepares you for the environment of your ancestors. And so the environment of our ancestors was a tough environment.
Oh, man.
The main job today is don't die.
Yeah.
That's all we have to do is don't die.
Don't die.
Don't die.
And there's a lot of things to not do that. Hunt, kill, gather.
Yep.
Procreate.
Yeah. And then we throw in, you go back to your negative reinforcement. And so we throw that in the mix. And so anytime you're in a situation that makes you uncomfortable, your caveman brain goes, "Oh, we could die here." Yeah. No, I don't think that we consciously think of that. No, I don't think we could die here. We just
sometimes I would say even so quickly we don't even process.
Right. We don't. We just feel uncomfortable. And now you got 12,000 years of evolution that says don't feel uncomfortable. If you feel uncomfortable, you're about to die.
Yeah.
Get out of that situation. So you get out of the situation, you relax, you feel better. What do you do the next time? Yeah. You get out of the situation, you relax, you feel better.
It's a loop, and it reinforces itself. And you take something like social anxiety, where we would say probably to a 7th grader who's really worried about getting rejected in front of all of their peers, "Hey man, you're not going to die. Don't worry about it." But that is not what we've all been left with. 10,000 years ago, if you got booted out of the tribe and you were in the jungle alone, you died. So social acceptance is a huge thing. And looking at a 7th grader telling them, like, "Don't worry about that, bud. Don't worry about it." It's like, that is not a valid response.
Right. It probably gets to why the worst thing to tell somebody who is struggling with anxiety is calm down. Like they hadn't thought of that.
About it.
Like, thanks for telling me that. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
Okay.
There was I forget the other psychologist. It was years ago I heard, and said that telling somebody to calm down is like telling someone to speak Chinese when they don't know how to speak Chinese. Right. It's like, I don't know how. I would have done that if I already knew how, and they don't know how.
No, the same. You hear that all the time, like, "Hey, man up" or something like that. It's like, well, okay, well, how do you do that?
Yeah. How do you do that? Yeah.
So yeah, we got left with that guy. We're all anxious.
We're all
We're all processing worries. I guess maybe a second on how would you tell somebody that some major anxiety they have is actually either just a normal fear response or a normal, like a typical worry to have.
I'd have to hear more about the specific.
I guess I just think, if somebody said, this Rottweiler came running at me and it was barking really viciously and I started feeling anxiety, I'd be like, no, bud, that's fear.
That's
and
fear.
You ought to be.
Yeah, that's a good point, because fear and anxiety have they're similar but different.
Right.
Different. So that's a good point. I think we should talk about that. We should define anxiety. What anxiety to me is fear in a situation when you're not actually in danger. So it's a situation you're not under any threat. So talking to the attractive person sitting next to you and you feel afraid, that would be anxiety. Sitting next to the Rottweiler who is barking and like
rabid and foaming at the mouth,
that's not anxiety, that's fear.
Right.
And so anytime where we're in a situation where we're standing next to a really high ledge, and we feel fear, an animal that's even bigger, stronger, scared, that's fear, something that can actually do physical harm. And that's normal fear. I wouldn't call that anxiety. Like, that should be normal fear. But the anxiety is when you're in that situation. It's public speaking. It's introducing yourself to somebody. It's ordering at a restaurant. Checking yourself in an appointment. Which people experience fear in these situations. But it's anxiety, I would say.
And some of it gets based off of humans' ability to project ourselves into the future, and we could easily. And I'm sure a lot of clients can easily look around them in the moment and tell you're probably not going to die right here. But, well, what about this and what about that and the snowball effect? And, I think sometimes when you're working with somebody with anxiety, it's almost about like really trying to peg where this is going to go.
Right. And what I like to do is have them be able to tell the difference between real threat versus perceived threat. And those are very different.
Right.
And we have a different response to that. So I would never try to say your emotions are invalid or like you shouldn't feel what you feel. Don't tell anybody that ever, that you shouldn't feel what you feel. And don't talk to your partner that way either. And I never do that. But I would say is we need to figure out, is this a real threat or a perceived threat? If it's a real threat, get the heck away. Get yourself safe.
Go.
If the fire alarm in the building goes off, don't just be like, well, I'm dealing with my anxiety and hang out.
I'm really going to process this.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if it's a perceived threat, then we have to take a different approach because, getting back to the negative reinforcement stuff, when we get out of the situation, it just strengthens that bond there. And so then our only skill is get out of the situation. That's the only thing we know how to do. So when it's perceived threat, then approach is actually the better option, is not to listen to the emotion, not to listen to the anxiety, which is probably why exposure therapy works so well.
Yeah. So exposure therapy that Drew is talking about it's probably a big thing for me, and we'll end up doing an episode on it at some point. But I just think often the problem is the prescription for the solution. It's if you look at people who tell you they want freedom, it's almost about, if you sacrifice some of your freedom, you're going to maximize some of your freedom. And with anxiety, it's about, if you're afraid of dogs, we're going to talk about dogs. We're going to go to PetSmart. We're going to get a dog in the office. Like, we're going to do what we need to do. And anxiety and exposure treatment is exactly that, in a safe environment with consent from the individual and progressing at a pace that is workable, exposing them directly to whatever it is that is causing that future projection and that anxiety to occur. And
so sometimes as therapists we call it like a fear hierarchy, fear ladder, where basically we identify like, okay, this is the top end, which is petting the Rottweiler, or speaking in front of 500 people, or I don't know, I can think of another top end one.
Honestly, probably the speaking in front of people has got to be the best, because I could take any high schooler right now and tell them they have to give an oral speech on Friday, and watch the tailspin start to occur, and that's I think that is a really classic example of where you and I would summarize this whole thing, as far as it would be very normal to have anxiety in that situation.
Yeah, sure.
And I think if you've ever seen a really good public speaker, you're so inclined to go, well, I mean, but they're really good, or I mean, they're probably not anxious like I'm anxious, or something to that effect. And the truth is, I think anyone who is a good public speaker is extremely anxious. They're just really good at being anxious, and they're really good at public speaking while being anxious.
Exactly. Like I think that kind of gets back to like the whole idea of do more better is we never get good at something and then start doing it. So you'll never feel comfortable and then start public speaking. You know, you'll never feel good around dogs and then start being around dogs. It's the other way around.
Totally.
It always starts with the action. So if you want to get comfortable public speaking, what are you gonna do? Public speak. A lot of times, the teens that I've seen is, you know, say we pick up a new video game. It's usually really awkward. You don't know what you're doing. You're not sure how the buttons work, you know, and then like 20 minutes into it, you're kind of getting it. And then like an hour into, okay, now I've got the controls down and now I'm playing the game. You didn't get comfortable with the controls and start playing the game. You started playing the game and then got comfortable with the controls.
Right.
And so that's how anxiety works too. And so if you have something in your life that is causing you anxiety and it's causing you fear, we're going to start doing it. Now, we don't have to start at the top of the ladder. Like, we don't have to start with the talking to 500 people, and we don't have to start with petting the Rottweiler. We set a whole fear hierarchy, and we come up with something that we think we can manage.
I'm sitting here thinking you're so correct. You got a little bit of correct left over there. I think it's important to know too, you don't have to go after those anxieties. You know,
You don't.
I have a massive fear of spiders. I do not intend on ever signing up for therapy about my fear of spiders.
Yeah.
But if I decided I wanted to be a zoologist
That would be
and
fun.
work at the, you know, public zoo down the street, and I needed to tend to the arachnid quarter, okay, maybe you need
This
to
is a
start
problem.
figuring that out. And so sometimes, you know, maybe it's not necessarily.
Yeah, that's a great point. There should be a reason why.
Yeah.
You know, why do you want to do this? And so when it comes to social anxiety, well, relationships are important. They're probably the best thing we have in life.
That's a hard sell that we'll get into at some other
Yeah.
point too.
But yeah, I see what you're saying. So I think there are some fears that you can get through life just fine with. I think that the hardcore anxiety treatment people would say you should go after your spear of spiders.
Yeah.
I don't care. Like,
There's actually probably much bigger things that I am afraid of that I would go after, like putting our profession on the line in front of, you know,
yeah,
the world to see.
right. Well, and I don't know if we'll have any kind of like OCD experts who kind of watch this video. Like, I know some, you know, if your fears of germs, the highest end of the ladder might be like licking a toilet seat.
Oh,
and
yeah,
my thought would be, I don't know how that makes you more functional in life to be able to do that. Now, I do think it is important to get over the fear, and to a point that you're functioning.
Yeah.
I don't think licking a toilet seat would be functioning.
You don't think what now?
Licking a toilet seat is functioning or necessary.
I agree with you, except for, I mean, you and I are former athletes. He's a current athlete,
yeah.
by the way. But you and I used to,
Overlearning, yeah.
You and I used to play football, for example. And if somebody said, "Oh, you're being too aggressive," just be the right amount aggressive,
Yeah.
and everything will be fine. It's like, well, you know, that's probably okay a lot of the time.
That's
but
fair.
you know, going for something more than just surviving, I would say I'm not someone who has ever prescribed someone go lick a toilet seat. But I do look at it and I think, if you're really going after something more than just surviving, I'm pretty on board with it a lot of the time. I don't know if I would necessarily prescribe that in particular, but I think there's something to be said for the exaggeration that goes beyond where you started.
You know, and as you said it, I was thinking it again. And so the sports analogy kind of got me. Is you learn to shoot a free throw, you learn to do it one-handed at some point. You never have to do it one-handed in a game,
Right.
But if you can do it one-handed, that's an important skill. So maybe I could probably be talked into going some level above the top of the hierarchy. So do we have a take home here? I think we just don't like the idea of pathologizing anxiety.
Yeah, I think the baseline is it's a really normal part of the human experience. There is no way you are going to get out of whatever you're doing without anxiety. We will do much more about this later. There's all kinds of great solutions with anxiety, such as like sometimes it's just about occupying the space where that's taken up in your brain. Sometimes it's about whatever you're trying to go for. You know, whatever you're public speaking about probably ought to be something pretty important in your life. And if you're doing that for your profession, maybe that's something worth going after that fear. We'll talk a lot about exposure, I'm sure, at one point.
I'm glad you brought up solution, because I think that's an important part of it. A lot of the times it's the solution to the anxiety that becomes the problem.
Yeah.
So we probably, I'm sure you see, I know I see lots of teens and young adults who have cut in the past, a lot of times they were doing that because they had so much anxiety, or drug use. You're doing that because you have so much anxiety. Alcohol, so much anxiety. The compulsions with OCD are usually generally to manage the anxiety. And so what happens is the problem is the solution that you're trying to use to get rid of the anxiety. The problem is not the anxiety.
Right. I think as far as, we want to offer a solution to you as a listener every time we do an episode. I'd say the solution for anxiety begins with acceptance and the idea that you are supposed to feel this. This is a very normal. Anxiety and hunger are identical in terms of your brain and your human existence are bound by those things. And if you told me, well, I get this hunger feeling every night around 5 o'clock and it's a problem, I would say, I think you're probably supposed to feel that way.
Genuine thing.
A lot of times, it's very hard for people, especially seeking out treatment. They want their anxiety to stop. And I think the first step is accepting it may not stop, or it maybe shouldn't stop.
Right. And maybe it shouldn't. Maybe this is not about getting rid of the anxiety. This is about living your life with the anxiety and living it better.
Yep.
Because usually it's getting in the way of something that you've got going on, something that is meaningful to you, that's important to you, and you've stopped doing that as a solution to the anxiety. Exactly.
Well, thanks everybody. We'll see you next episode. If you haven't already, click like and subscribe, and as always, do more better. Don't forget to click like and subscribe. You can follow us on our Instagram at DMB Psychology for updates and to submit any comments or questions. You can also find us on our website, domorebetter.buzzsprout.com, where we have info on all episodes as well as our donations and merchandise links if you'd like to support the podcast. You can search for us on YouTube and all major podcast platforms under Do More Better.